Marcus Chen adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses for the third time in 5 minutes. A nervous habit he'd developed during his 7 years working at the Thornfield University Library. The ancient building's Gothic architecture always made him feel small, especially during the late evening hours when shadows stretched long between the towering bookshelf. Tonight was no different, except for the peculiar chill that seemed to seep through the stone walls despite the October heat wave. He was cataloging rare manuscripts in the restricted section when he heard the soft click of heels against marble. Marcus looked up from his work, expecting to see Professor Williams or perhaps one of the graduate students who occasionally needed access to the older texts. Instead, he found himself staring at the most breathtaking woman he'd ever encountered. She stood perhaps 5 feet 6 inches tall, with porcelain skin that seemed to glow in the lamplight, and midnight black hair that cascaded in perfect waves past her shoulders. Her dress was elegant yet timeless, a deep burgundy velvet that hugged her curves before flowing to just below her knees. But it was her eyes that truly captured his attention, violet blue orbs that seemed to hold depths of ancient wisdom and barely contain power. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't quite place. "Something European, perhaps Eastern European. I'm looking for a particular collection." The medieval chronicles of the Carpathian courts. Marcus blinked, realizing he'd been staring. Heat rushed to his cheeks as he fumbled with the catalog cards in his hands, sending several fluttering to the floor. Yes ma'am. That's a very specific request." He knelt to gather the scattered cards, his hands trembling slightly. Most people don't even know that collection exists. When he looked up, he found her staring at him with an expression of surprise that quickly transformed into something else, entirely amusement, perhaps, or intrigue. Her lips curved into a smile that revealed teeth just a shade too white and perfectly straight. "Ma'am," she repeated, her voice taking on a musical quality that made something flutter in Marcus's chest. "How refreshing." "I'm sorry if that's too formal," Marcus said, scrambling to his feet and nearly knocking over a reading lamp in the process. My grandmother always taught me to be respectful to ladies, especially beautiful ones." The moment the words left his mouth, he wanted to disappear entirely. "I mean, not that I'm trying to. I wasn't attempting to flirt or anything inappropriate. Stop," she commanded gently, raising one perfectly manicured hand. The simple gesture carried such authority that Marcus immediately fell silent. "What is your name?" Marcus Chen." He gestured toward his name tag with hands that still shook slightly. "I'm the evening curator for the rare books collection." "Marcus," she repeated, as if testing how his name felt on her tongue. "I am Srafina Blackthorne, and you, Marcus Chen, have just done something no one has done in over 3 centuries. What's that?" he asked, genuinely confused and more than a little concerned he'd somehow violated library protocol. "You've shown me genuine respect without knowing who I am or what I am capable of." Her violet eyes seemed to sparkle with an inner light. "Tell me, Marcus, do you treat all women with such courtesy?" "Well, yes," he said, still bewildered by the intensity of her attention. "Shouldn't everyone?" Srafina laughed, a sound like silver bells that echoed strangely in the vast library space. "Oh, my dear boy, you have no idea how rare that quality has become in this modern world." She moved closer, and Marcus caught a hint of her perfume, something exotic and intoxicating, like jasmine and midnight roses. About those chronicles, Marcus managed, trying to focus on his job despite the magnetic pull he felt toward this mysterious woman. "They're kept in our climate-controlled vault. Access is typically restricted to faculty and doctoral researchers." "May I ask what your research focus is?" "Family history," she replied smoothly. "My lineage traces back to those courts. I'm particularly interested in the records from the 15th century. Marcus nodded, making notes on his clipboard. "I'll need to see some identification and have you fill out our access forms. The process usually takes a day or 2 for approval, but I might be able to expedite it if that won't be necessary," Srafina interrupted, her voice taking on a commanding tone that seemed to resonate through Marcus's bones. "You will retrieve those documents for me now." For a moment, Marcus felt his will wavering, as if something was trying to cloud his thoughts. but his natural inclination toward propriety and his dedication to proper library procedures helped him resist whatever strange influence she seemed to be attempting. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I really can't do that without following protocol," he said apologetically but firmly. "I could lose my job, and these documents are irreplaceable. I hope you understand." Serafina stared at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through surprise, frustration, and then something that looked remarkably like respect. "You resist me," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Excuse me, nothing," she said, her smile returning. "You're quite right. Of course, proper procedures must be followed." She moved to the reading table and gracefully settled into one of the antique chairs. "Perhaps while I wait, you could tell me more about your work here. I find myself curious about you, Marcus Chen." Something in her tone made him shiver. "Though not unpleasantly, there's not much to tell, really. I've always loved books, especially old ones. There's something about touching pages that were written centuries ago, knowing that someone long dead poured their thoughts and experiences onto that paper." He gestured toward the towering shelves around them. "History comes alive in places like this." "Indeed it does," Serafina agreed, her eyes never leaving his face. "And you live alone?" Marcus, surely such a thoughtful, respectful young man, has someone special in his life. Marcus felt his cheeks burn again. "No, ma'am, just me and my cat, Ptolemy. I'm not exactly what you'd call a social butterfly." He laughed nervously. "I spend most of my free time reading or cataloging my personal collection at home." "Fascinating," she murmured. "And your family, do they live nearby?" "It's just my grandmother now. She lives in a care facility across town. I visit her every Sunday." Marcus found himself relaxing despite the woman's intense attention. There was something about her that made him want to share, to open up in ways he rarely did with strangers. "You care for your elder," Serafina observed. "Another admirable quality." She leaned forward slightly, her violet eyes seeming to glow in the lamplight. "Tell me, Marcus, what would you say if I told you I was far older than I appear? That I've walked this earth for centuries, seeing empires rise and fall, watching the world change in ways both beautiful and terrible." Marcus considered this seriously, as he did most things. "I'd say that sounds like either a fascinating story or the beginning of a very elaborate historical role-play scenario." He smiled shyly. "Either way, I'd probably want to hear more." Serafina threw back her head and laughed, the sound echoing through the library with genuine delight. "Oh, Marcus, you are absolutely perfect." "Perfect for what?" he asked, though something in her tone made him both excited and nervous. She stood gracefully, moving around the table toward him with fluid, predatory grace. "Perfect to be mine, of course. From this moment forward, you shall serve as my personal attendant, my companion, my devoted helper in all things." "I'm sorry, what?" Marcus backed up a step, bumping into the bookshelf behind him. "Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion. I work for the university, not as anyone's personal assistant." "Not anymore," Serafina said, reaching out to touch his cheek with cool fingers. The contact sent electricity racing through his nervous system. "You see, Marcus, I am what your modern world would call a vampire, and you, with your genuine kindness, your respect, your absolutely adorable nervousness, have awakened something in me that has been dormant for decades." Marcus stared at her, processing this information with the same methodical approach he used for everything else. "A vampire," he repeated slowly. "Yes, as in drinks blood, lives forever, turns into a bat, some of those things, yes." Her smile revealed those perfect white teeth again, and Marcus noticed that her canines were indeed slightly longer and sharper than normal. "Though I prefer not to turn into a bat. It's terribly undignified, right?" Marcus said, his world tilting slightly off its axis. "And you want me to be your personal assistant?" "Attendant," she corrected. "It's a much more intimate position. You'll live in my home, tend to my needs, accompany me on my nightly activities. In return, I'll protect you, provide for you, and show you wonders beyond your current imagination." Marcus felt his heart racing, though whether from fear or excitement, he couldn't say. "And if I refuse?" Serafina's expression grew serious. Most people don't have the option to refuse. But you, my dear Marcus, have proven to be remarkably resistant to my persuasive abilities, so I'm asking rather than compelling." The honesty in her voice surprised him. "You're really a vampire." "I really am. And you really want me to come work for you, because I called you ma'am, and treated you with respect. It's been so very long since someone showed me genuine courtesy, without being forced to do so," she said softly. "You looked at me and saw a lady deserving of respect, not prey or a potential conquest. Do you have any idea how precious that is?" Marcus studied her face, seeing something vulnerable beneath the supernatural confidence. "What would I have to do exactly?" "Help me navigate this modern world that changes so quickly I can barely keep up. Assist with my correspondence, manage my household affairs. Perhaps help me understand these computer devices that have become so prevalent." She stepped closer. "In return, you'd have access to knowledge and experiences most humans can only dream of. Libraries that predate the printing press, art collections that museums would kill for, stories of history from someone who lived through it." It was, Marcus realized, possibly the most tempting offer anyone had ever made him: adventure, purpose, and the chance to spend time with the most fascinating woman he'd ever met, even if she was technically undead. "I'd need to give my boss 2 weeks' notice," he said finally. Serafina's smile was radiant. "Of course, proper etiquette must be observed, and I'd want to visit my grandmother regularly." "Naturally, and Ptolemy would have to come too. I've always been fond of cats." Marcus took a deep breath, hardly believing what he was about to say. "Then yes, ma'am. I accept your offer." Serafina stepped forward and, before he could react, pressed a soft kiss to his forehead. Her lips were cool but gentle, and the gesture felt both intimate and protective. "Welcome to your new life, Marcus Chen," she whispered. "I promise it will be anything but ordinary." As she pulled back, Marcus caught a glimpse of something in her eyes that looked remarkably like relief, as if she'd been afraid he might refuse. The thought that this powerful, ancient being had been nervous about his answer made something warm bloom in his chest. He had no idea what he'd just gotten himself into. But for the first time in his quiet, predictable life, Marcus felt truly alive. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood before the most imposing mansion he'd ever seen, clutching Ptolemy's carrier in one hand and his single suitcase in the other. The Blackthorn estate loomed against the storm-darkened sky like something from a Gothic novel, complete with gargoyles perched on the corners and wrought iron gates that had opened silently at his approach. "Well, Ptolemy," he murmured to his orange tabby, who was peering through the carrier's mesh with wide green eyes. "I don't think we're in Kansas anymore." The massive oak doors swung open before he could knock, revealing Serafina in an elegant black evening gown that made her skin seem to glow like moonlight. Her violet eyes sparkled with genuine pleasure as she saw him. "Marcus, right on time." She glided forward, her movements possessing that same fluid grace he remembered from the library. "And this must be the famous Ptolemy. He's a bit nervous." "About the move," Marcus admitted, setting down his suitcase to better hold the carrier. "New places make him anxious, as they should any sensible creature," came a smooth, accented voice from the shadows of the foyer. A man emerged, tall, devastatingly handsome, with the same otherworldly beauty as Serafina, but possessed of an entirely different energy. Where she emanated ancient elegance, he radiated dangerous charm. His dark hair was styled in a way that looked effortlessly perfect, and his emerald eyes held a mischievous glint that made Marcus immediately wary. "Marcus," Serafina said with a slight sigh, "allow me to present my cousin, Victor Ravenclaw." "Victor, this is Marcus Chen, my new attendant." Victor circled Marcus slowly, much like a predator sizing up prey. "So this is the mortal who has captured dear Serafina's attention. How quaint." He leaned in close enough that Marcus could feel the unnatural coolness radiating from his skin. "Tell me, little human, what makes you so special that our Serafina would break centuries of tradition?" "I honestly have no idea," Marcus replied, his natural honesty cutting through his nervousness. "I just treated her with basic respect." Victor blinked, clearly not expecting such a straightforward answer. "Basic respect," he repeated, as if the concept were foreign. Victor, Serafina's voice carried a warning note. Behave yourself. I'm always perfectly behaved, cousin dear. Victor's grin revealed fangs that were more pronounced than Serafina's. I'm simply curious about our new pet attendant, Serafina corrected firmly. And he is under my protection. Remember that. Before Victor could respond, the sound of heels clicking against marble announced another rival. This vampire was clearly older than the other two, not in appearance, for she looked to be in her 40s with silver threading through her auburn hair, but in the weight of years that seemed to press around her like an invisible cloak. Aunt Cordelia, Serafina inclined her head respectfully. I'd like you to meet Marcus Chen. Cordelia's steel-gray eyes examined Marcus with the intensity of a microscope. She was dressed in a severe black suit that spoke of old money and older traditions. When she spoke, her voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. This is highly irregular, Serafina, in my for centuries. I have never seen a mortal brought into our household in such a manner. She circled Marcus much as Victor had, but her assessment felt clinical rather than predatory. He's small for his kind, fragile-looking. Are you certain he can fulfill the duties required? What exactly are those duties? Marcus asked, feeling like he was being discussed rather than included in the conversation. All three vampires turned to stare at him with expressions ranging from surprise to amusement. Apparently, household staff weren't expected to speak unless spoken to. He has spirit, Victor observed with a laugh. I'll give him that. Cordelia's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. Indeed. Tell me, young man, what do you know of our kind, our customs, our needs? Marcus adjusted his glasses nervously, but maintained eye contact. I know Serafina is a vampire, and presumably you all are as well. Beyond that, I'm afraid I'm working mostly from movies and books, which I suspect aren't entirely accurate. Movies and books, Cordelia repeated flatly. Aunt Cordelia, Serafina intervened, moving to stand beside Marcus in a gesture that felt protective. Marcus will learn our ways. I intend to teach him personally, and until then, Cordelia's tone suggested she found the entire situation distasteful. What happens when he inadvertently breaks some crucial protocol? When he offends one of our guests? Then I will take full responsibility, Serafina said, her voice carrying that same commanding authority Marcus had witnessed in the library. Marcus is my choice, and I stand by it. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus found himself stepping slightly forward, placing himself more firmly at Serafina's side. If I may, he said quietly, I'm a quick learner, and I take instruction well. I may not know your customs yet, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to avoid causing problems for Serafina or your family. Cordelia studied him for a long moment, then surprisingly, her stern expression softened. Just a fraction. At least he has manners. Very well, Serafina. But his training is your responsibility entirely. Of course, Serafina agreed. She turned to Marcus with a smile that made his heart skip. Come, let me show you to your quarters. I think you'll find them comfortable. As they walked through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced individuals, who were undoubtedly ancestors, Marcus tried to process everything he'd just witnessed. The casual way they discussed centuries of life, the obvious hierarchy and traditions, the way they seemed to view him as both curiosity and potential problem. They don't approve of me, he observed as they climbed a sweeping staircase. They don't understand you, Serafina corrected, which is different. Victor finds most things amusing, so his reaction is fairly typical. Cordelia, she's protective of our family's reputation and traditions. Your presence here challenges both. And you, do you have any regrets about bringing me here? Serafina stopped walking and turned to face him fully. In the dim light of the hallway, her beauty was almost otherworldly. None whatsoever. You'll see, Marcus, once you understand our world, you'll realize why your presence here is so significant. She led him to a door at the end of a long hallway and gestured for him to enter. Marcus stepped inside and felt his jaw drop. The room was larger than his entire apartment had been, furnished with antiques that looked like they belonged in a museum. A massive 4-poster bed dominated one wall, while tall windows offered a view of gardens that seemed to stretch on forever. But what really caught his attention was the wall of built-in bookshelves, filled with more volumes than he could count. "I thought you might appreciate the library access," Srafina said, noting his expression. "Many of these books are first editions or manuscripts that exist nowhere else in the world." "This is incredible," Marcus breathed, setting down Ptolemy's carrier and his suitcase. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay," Srafina replied softly. "I know this is overwhelming, and I know my family can be intense, but I hope you'll give this a chance." Marcus looked round the room again, then at the woman who had turned his quiet life completely upside down. "I already told you I would, ma'am. I don't go back on my word." Her smile was radiant. "There's that respect again. Do you have any idea how refreshing it is?" "Not really," Marcus admitted. "Where I come from, treating people politely is just basic human decency. And that, my dear Marcus, is exactly why you're perfect for this position." She moved to the windows, gazing out at the darkening sky. "There are things you'll need to learn. Our schedules are different. We're naturally nocturnal, though we can function during daylight hours if necessary. Our dietary requirements are specialized, and there are protocols for interacting with other supernatural beings." "Other supernatural beings?" Marcus felt his worldview expanding yet again. "Vampires aren't the only ones who walk in the shadows, Marcus. You'll meet others eventually. Werewolves, practitioners of various magical arts. Each group has its own customs and territories." Marcus sank into one of the chairs, feeling slightly overwhelmed. Ptolemy chose that moment to meow plaintively from his carrier, reminding everyone of his presence. "Oh, let's get him settled," Srafina said, moving to help Marcus open the carrier. Ptolemy emerged cautiously, his green eyes wide as he took in his new surroundings. After a moment of hesitation, he padded over to Srafina and, to Marcus's amazement, began purring as she scratched behind his ears. "He likes you," Marcus observed with surprise. "Ptolemy's usually very shy around new people. Animals often sense our true nature," Srafina explained, "but they also recognize intent. He knows I mean no harm to either of you." As if to prove her point, Ptolemy wound himself around her ankles, marking her with his scent in the universal feline gesture of acceptance. "Well, that settles it," Marcus said with a smile. "If Ptolemy approves, then I guess we're staying. Over." The next few hours, Srafina gave him a tour of the mansion, explaining the layout and introducing him to the small staff of humans who handled daytime operations. Marcus was relieved to learn he wouldn't be the only mortal in the house, though. The others seemed to view him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "They're wondering why you're different," Srafina explained as they walked through the conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with night-blooming flowers that filled the air with intoxicating perfume. "Usually, humans in our employ are either born into service families or are compelled to serve. Compelled vampire hypnosis. Though it's more complex than your media portrays. We can influence human minds, make them compliant, erase troublesome memories." She glanced at him sideways. "Which is why your resistance in the library was so remarkable." Marcus pondered this as they continued their tour. "Is that why Victor and Cordelia seem so surprised by my behavior? Because they expect me to be, what, mindlessly obedient?" "Essentially, yes." Srafina led him into what appeared to be a formal dining room, though the massive table was set for only two. "Which brings us to dinner. I hope you don't mind eating alone. Our dietary requirements are quite different from yours." "What exactly do you eat?" Marcus asked, then immediately felt his cheeks burn. "I'm sorry, that was probably rude to ask." "Not rude at all. You'll need to understand these things." Srafina gestured for him to sit at one end of the table while she took the chair beside him, rather than at the opposite end. "We survive primarily on blood, though we can consume small amounts of other liquids. Wine, certain teas, solid food is unpleasant for us. And the blood," Marcus swallowed hard. "Do you hurt people to get it?" "Not anymore." Her expression grew serious. "There are ethical sources now, blood banks, willing donors who are compensated fairly and treated with respect. The old ways of hunting and feeding indiscriminately are outdated." A staff member appeared with a plate of what looked like an expertly prepared meal. Marcus realized he was famished. The stress and excitement of the day had made him forget about eating entirely. "This looks amazing," he said, taking a bite of what turned out to be the most delicious chicken he'd ever tasted. "Do you mind if I ask how old you are? I know that might be rude, but for 137 years, Serafina replied without hesitation. "I was turned during the Renaissance, in what is now Romania." Marcus nearly choked on his food. "For 100, wow, that's a lot of history, indeed. I've seen the rise and fall of empires, the development of technologies that would seem like magic to the people of my mortal years." She leaned back in her chair, studying him, "And in all that time, I've never met anyone quite like you, Marcus Chen." "What do you mean?" "Someone who looks at me and sees a lady first, a vampire second, someone who offers respect freely rather than through compulsion or fear." Her violet eyes seemed to glow in the candlelight. "Do you know what that feels like, after centuries of being either feared or coveted for my power?" Marcus set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "Lonely, I'd imagine." The simple words seemed to hit her like a physical blow. For a moment, her composed expression cracked, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. "Yes," she whispered. "Exactly that." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of her admission hanging between them. Marcus found himself wanting to reach out, to offer comfort, but wasn't sure if such a gesture would be welcome or appropriate. "May I ask you something?" he said finally. "Of course. When you said I'd be your attendant, what exactly does that involve? I want to do right by you, but I'm still not entirely sure what my duties are." Serafina's smile returned, though it was softer now, more genuine. "Help me navigate the modern world that changes so quickly I struggle to keep up. Manage my correspondence, assist with social obligations, help me understand technology that seems to evolve daily." She paused. "But mostly, Marcus, I simply want someone I can trust, someone who sees me as more than just a predator or a relic from a bygone age." "I can do that," Marcus said quietly. "The trust part, I mean, I'm still working on the not dash being dash intimidated dash by dash the dash vampire thing." Serafina laughed, the sound filling the formal dining room with unexpected warmth. "Oh, Marcus, I think this arrangement is going to work out perfectly." As if summoned by her laughter, Victor appeared in the doorway, his expression curious. "Having fun without me? How terribly rude." "Victor," Serafina sighed, "did you need something?" "Just wondering if our new pet would like a tour of the more interesting parts of the estate." Victor's grin was decidedly predatory. "The dungeons, perhaps, or the collection room?" "Collection room?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to know. "Trophies from previous centuries," Victor explained with obvious relish. "Weapons, artifacts, the occasional skeleton of someone who proved unworthy." "Victor." Serafina's voice carried a clear warning. "Stop trying to terrorize him." "I'm not terrorizing anyone. I'm simply being informative." Victor moved into the room with that fluid vampire grace, circling their table like a shark. "Our new friend should understand exactly what kind of household he's joined, don't you think?" Marcus looked between the two vampires, noting the tension that had suddenly filled the air. "Are you trying to scare me away?" he asked Victor directly. Victor paused, clearly not expecting the direct question. "Perhaps. Would it work?" "No," Marcus replied honestly. "I gave Serafina my word, and I don't break promises. Besides, I've read enough Gothic literature to know that old families usually have dark histories. It doesn't mean the present has to be defined by the past." Both vampires stared at him in surprise. Victor recovered first, throwing back his head and laughing with genuine delight. "Oh, cousin, you found a treasure," he said to Serafina. "He's got backbone after all." "I told you he was special," Serafina replied, her tone holding a note of pride that made Marcus's chest warm. "Special indeed," Victor agreed. He fixed Marcus with a look that was suddenly serious. "Very well. Mortal, you've passed the first test, but there will be others, and they won't all be as gentle as family dinner conversation." "I understand," Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely sure he did as Victor sauntered away, presumably to cause trouble elsewhere. Serafina reached across the table and gently touched Marcus's hand. Her skin was cool but soft, and the contact sent an unexpected thrill through him. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For not running away. For not letting Victor intimidate you. For—" She paused, seeming to search for words. "For making me feel like I made the right choice." Marcus turned his hand palm up, gently squeezing her fingers. "You did make the right choice. Ma'am, I'm not going anywhere." In the candlelight of the formal dining room, surrounded by centuries of history and supernatural mystery, Marcus realized that despite all the unknowns and potential dangers, he'd never felt more certain about anything in his life. 3 weeks into his new life at the Blackthorn estate, Marcus had developed a routine that would have seemed impossible to his former self. He woke at sunset, spent his evenings assisting Serafina with various tasks, and often found himself staying up until dawn simply talking with her about everything and nothing. Tonight found them in the mansion's vast library, a room that made even the university's collection look modest by comparison. Serafina sat curled in a leather armchair, reading from a manuscript written in what appeared to be medieval Latin, while Marcus worked at a nearby desk, updating her correspondence on a laptop computer. "This email from the Metropolitan Museum is interesting," Marcus said, adjusting his glasses as he read. "They're asking if you'd be willing to loan some pieces from your collection for an upcoming exhibition on Renaissance art." "Which pieces?" Serafina asked, not looking up from her manuscript. "The Botticelli sketches and something called the Medici Madonna." Marcus paused. "Should I ask how you happen to own previously unknown works by famous artists?" Serafina's lips curved into a mysterious smile. "Let's just say I knew some very talented people during my early years as a vampire. Artists often needed patrons, and I've always appreciated beauty in all its forms." "You knew Botticelli personally?" Marcus's voice rose with excitement, causing Ptolemy to look up from where he was napping on a nearby windowsill. "Sandro was a dear friend, terribly dramatic, but brilliant." She set down her manuscript and moved to sit on the arm of Marcus's chair, leaning over to see the museum's email. Her proximity filled his senses with that intoxicating scent of jasmine and night roses. "Tell them I'll consider it, but I want to meet with their head curator personally before making any decisions." Marcus tried to focus on typing the response, but Serafina's closeness was making it difficult to concentrate. Over the past few weeks, he'd found himself increasingly drawn to her, not just her supernatural beauty, but her intelligence, her centuries of accumulated wisdom, her unexpected moments of vulnerability. "There," he said, hitting send, diplomatic but non-committal. "Perfect." Serafina remained perched on the chair's arm, studying his profile. "You've adapted remarkably well to all this, you know. Most humans would be overwhelmed by the reality of our world. Most humans probably wouldn't find it as fascinating as I do," Marcus replied. "Yesterday you showed me a first edition Gutenberg Bible. Last week, Victor told me stories about the French Revolution that aren't in any history book. How could I not be fascinated? And the feeding." Serafina's voice became more serious. "You've seen us consume blood now. Many humans find it disturbing." Marcus considered this. He had indeed witnessed the vampire's feeding habits, clinical, efficient, and nothing like the messy violence portrayed in movies. They used crystal goblets, treating the blood with the same reverence a wine connoisseur might show a vintage bottle. "It's part of who you are," he said simply. "I don't judge people for eating meat, and this isn't really different. You need it to survive, and you obtain it ethically. That's what matters." Serafina was quiet for so long that Marcus looked up to find her staring at him with an expression of wonder. "For centuries," she murmured, "for centuries. And I've never met anyone who understood so instinctively." Before Marcus could respond, the library doors burst open and Victor strode in, his usual playful demeanor replaced by something more urgent. "Serafina, we have a problem," he announced, then noticed Marcus and paused. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Marcus is part of this household now." Serafina replied, rising from the chair arm. "He stays." "What's wrong?" Victor glanced between them, then shrugged. "Very well. Damien Ravencrest is coming to visit." The name meant nothing to Marcus, But Serafina's reaction was immediate and dramatic. All color drained from her already pale face, and her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "When?" she asked, her voice deadly quiet. "Tomorrow night. His advance messenger arrived an hour ago." Victor's expression was grim. "He's claiming ancient right of courtship." "Absolutely not." Serafina snapped, her eyes flashing with anger that made them seem to glow from within. "I rejected his suit centuries ago. The matter is closed." "Who is Damien Ravencrest?" Marcus asked, feeling like he was missing crucial information. "A vampire lord from the old country," Victor explained. "Powerful, wealthy, and accustomed to getting what he wants. He's been pursuing Serafina for centuries, becoming increasingly insistent as our numbers dwindle, and increasingly desperate," Serafina added with disgust. "He sees me as breeding stock, nothing more, a way to continue his bloodline and increase his political power." Marcus felt an unexpected surge of protective anger. "Can't you just refuse to see him?" Victor and Serafina exchanged a look that spoke of complicated supernatural politics. "It's not that simple," Serafina explained. "Damien holds significant influence in the vampire courts. To refuse him outright without cause could create problems for our family." "What kind of problems?" Marcus pressed. "The kind that end with exiled or destroyed vampires," Victor said bluntly. "Damien has allies, resources, and a very long memory for slights." Marcus stood up from his chair, his protective instincts overriding his usual caution. "So what's the solution?" "Serafina can't be forced into a relationship she doesn't want." "Technically, she can," Victor replied grimly. "Ancient vampire law includes provisions for claiming unmated females of noble bloodlines, especially when the continuation of the species is at stake. Those laws are barbaric and outdated." Serafina protested, but still recognized by the courts, Victor pointed out. "Unless," both Marcus and Serafina looked at him expectantly. "Unless you can prove you're already bonded to another," Victor continued, his eyes gleaming with sudden interest. "A mate bond would supersede any claim Damien might make." "I'm not bonded to anyone," Serafina said, though her gaze flickered briefly to Marcus. "Not yet." Victor agreed. "But you could be." The implications of his words hung in the air between them. Marcus felt his heart rate increase as he began to understand what Victor was suggesting. "You mean?" Marcus started, then trailed off, not quite able to voice the thought. "A mating bond with a human," Victor said, spelling it out clearly. "It's rare, but not unprecedented, and once established, it's considered sacred and unbreakable by vampire law." Serafina was very still, very quiet. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully neutral. "That would require Marcus to consent to becoming my bonded mate. It's not a decision to be made lightly. The bond affects both parties permanently." Marcus looked between the two vampires, his mind racing. "What exactly would it involve?" "A blood exchange ritual," Victor explained. "Not enough to turn you into a vampire, but enough to create a permanent psychic and emotional connection. You'd share some of her supernatural longevity, strength, and healing abilities. She'd gain some of your human adaptability and emotional grounding, and we'd be mated." "Like married?" Marcus asked, his cheeks burning. "More than married," Serafina said softly. "Bonded mates can feel each other's emotions, share thoughts, sense each other's well-being across great distances. It's the most intimate connection possible between two beings." The room fell silent as Marcus processed this information. He looked at Serafina, beautiful, ancient, powerful Serafina, who had turned his quiet life upside down, and realized that the decision was actually quite simple. "Would you want that?" he asked her directly, not as a political necessity, but personally. "Would you want to be bonded to me?" Serafina's composed mask slipped, revealing the vulnerability underneath. "Marcus, I've grown to care for you more than I expected. These past weeks, having you here, talking with you, watching you adapt to our world with such grace." She took a shaky breath. "Yes, I would want that, but I won't ask you to sacrifice your human life for vampire politics." "You're not asking," Marcus pointed out. "I'm offering." He stood and moved to where she stood, taking her cool hands in his warm ones. "Serafina, you've given me more adventure and purpose in 3 weeks than I had in 30 years of ordinary life. If bonding with you means I can protect you from someone who wants to treat you like property, then that's not a sacrifice, it's a privilege." Tears that she couldn't shed gathered in her violet eyes. "You don't understand what you'd be giving up: a normal life, a human family, growing old naturally. I understand perfectly," Marcus said firmly, "and I choose you. I choose this life, this family, this incredible woman who saw something worth protecting in a shy librarian." Victor cleared his throat dramatically. "How wonderfully romantic. But we should probably focus on the practical aspects. The bonding ritual needs to be completed before Damien arrives tomorrow night, and it requires specific preparations." Serafina squeezed Marcus's hands. "Are you absolutely certain? Once the ritual is complete, there's no undoing it." Marcus looked into her eyes, those beautiful violet eyes that had captivated him from their first meeting, and smiled. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, ma'am." Her answering smile was radiant enough to light up the entire library. The rest of the evening passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Cordelia, when informed of their decision, surprised everyone by expressing approval. "Finally," she said crisply, "a sensible solution to an increasingly problematic situation. The boy has proven himself worthy, and this will certainly put Damien in his place." Victor took charge of the ritual preparations with an enthusiasm that bordered on theatrical. "We'll need candles, obviously, and the ceremonial goblets. It's been in the family for centuries. Oh, and we should invite witnesses. This needs to be official." "Witnesses?" Marcus asked nervously. "Family members, trusted allies," Serafina explained. "The more prestigious the witnesses, the more difficult it will be for Damien to challenge the validity of our bond." As the night progressed, Marcus found himself increasingly nervous, but never wavering in his decision. He spent some time alone with Ptolemy, explaining the situation to his feline companion as if the cat could understand the magnitude of what was about to happen. "I know it's crazy," he told Ptolemy, who was purring in his lap, "but I love her. Ptolemy, I love her intelligence, her strength, her vulnerability. The way she looks at me like I'm someone special. If this is my chance to be with her forever, how can I not take it?" Ptolemy meowed softly and rubbed his head against Marcus's hand, as if offering feline approval. Near dawn, as Marcus prepared for the few hours of sleep he'd need before the evening ceremony, Serafina knocked softly on his door. "Come in," he called, and she entered wearing a silk nightgown that made her look like something from a dream. "I wanted to thank you," she said, moving to sit on the edge of his bed. "What you're doing for me, for us, I know it's not easy." "It's the easiest decision I've ever made," Marcus replied honestly. He reached out to touch her face, marveling at how right it felt. "I love you, Serafina. I have since that first night in the library, even though I didn't fully understand what I was feeling. I love you too," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "My brave, wonderful Marcus." Their first real kiss was tender and sweet, filled with promise and the weight of forever. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard despite Serafina's lack of need for air. "Tomorrow night," she said softly. "Tomorrow night," Marcus agreed. As she left him to rest, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. In a few hours, he would undergo a supernatural ritual that would bind him forever to a vampire centuries older than himself. It should have terrified him. Instead, he had never felt more excited about the future. The following evening, Marcus stood before an ornate mirror in his room, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. Victor had provided him with formal attire befitting the occasion, a midnight blue suit that fit perfectly and probably cost more than Marcus's former annual salary. "You look distinguished," Serafina said from the doorway, and Marcus turned to see her in a gown that took his breath away. The deep purple silk seemed to capture and reflect light like liquid amethyst, and her silver hair had been arranged in an elaborate style that spoke of centuries-old elegance. "You look like a queen," Marcus replied, meaning every word. "Tonight, I feel like one," she admitted, moving into the room. "Are you ready for this?" Before Marcus could answer, a commotion from the courtyard below drew their attention to the window. A black carriage pulled by horses that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it had arrived at the estate's front entrance. Even from their elevated position, Marcus could see that the vehicle was clearly supernatural in origin to elegant, to perfect, to ominous, to be entirely of this world. "Damien," Srafina said, her voice tight with anxiety. "Should we delay the ceremony?" Marcus asked, noting her pale expression. "Absolutely not." Victor's voice came from behind them as he swept into the room without knocking. "If anything, we should accelerate it. Damien's timing is deliberate. He's hoping to catch us unprepared." Through the window, they watched as a figure emerged from the carriage. Even at a distance, Damien Ravencrest was imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, and moving with the predatory grace that seemed common to all vampires. He wore clothing that managed to look both timelessly elegant and vaguely threatening. "He's brought an entourage," Victor observed grimly, noting the additional figures emerging from the shadows around the carriage. At least 6 others, all powerful vampires by the look of them. "A show of force," Srafina muttered. "How typical." A knock at the door interrupted them, and one of the human staff members peered in nervously. "Begging your pardon, miss, but the gentleman downstairs is requesting an immediate audience. He says it's a matter of urgent supernatural law. Tell him we'll be down momentarily," Srafina replied with icy politeness. She turned to Marcus and Victor. "We proceed as planned. The ritual first, then we deal with Damien." They made their way to the mansion's grand ballroom, where Cordelia had overseen the preparation of the bonding ceremony. Candles arranged in intricate patterns filled the space with flickering light, and an ornate silver goblet sat waiting on a pedestal at the room's center. Several vampires Marcus didn't recognize had arrived as witnesses, allies of the Blackthorn family. According to Victor, "Places, everyone," Cordelia announced with military precision. "We begin immediately." Marcus took his position beside Srafina, at the room's center, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The ancient ritual words began, spoken in a language that predated most human civilizations, and Marcus felt power gathering in the air around them like an approaching storm. That's when the ballroom doors burst open. Damien Ravencrest strode in, with his entourage, his presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone in the room. He was even more imposing up close, well over 6 feet tall, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths of cold calculation. His pale skin bore the marble-like perfection of ancient vampires, and when he smiled, his fangs were clearly visible. "How delightfully cozy," Damien said, his voice carrying an accent that spoke of old European nobility. "I do hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "You are, actually," Srafina replied coolly, not moving from her position beside Marcus. "This is a private ceremony, a ceremony that appears suspiciously like a mating ritual." Damien observed, his cold eyes taking in the candles, the goblet, and the assembled witnesses. How unexpected. He stepped further into the room, his entourage fanning out behind him in a clear show of intimidation. "Srafina, my dear, surely you haven't forgotten our previous discussions about your future." "I've forgotten nothing," Srafina replied, her voice like ice, "including your inability to accept rejection gracefully." Damien's laugh was cold and humorless. "Rejection? My sweet Srafina, you seem to have misunderstood the nature of our relationship. I wasn't making a request, I was offering you the courtesy of choice before exercising my rights under ancient law." "What rights?" Marcus asked, stepping slightly forward despite Victor's warning hand on his shoulder. Damien's attention fixed on Marcus for the first time, and the weight of that gaze was like being examined by a predator deciding whether you were worth eating. "And you must be the human pet." "How quaint." His tone made the words sound like an insult. "Tell me, little mortal, do you have any idea what you're attempting to interfere with?" "I'm not interfering with anything," Marcus replied, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "I'm participating in a ceremony with the woman I love." "Love," Damien repeated, as if the concept were foreign. How delightfully naive. "This isn't about love, boy. This is about the survival of our species, about bloodlines and power and responsibilities that span centuries. What could a mortal possibly offer that I cannot provide 1,000-fold?" Marcus felt the eyes of everyone in the room upon him, the witnesses, Victor, Cordelia, Serafina, all waiting to see how a simple librarian would respond to a challenge from one of the most powerful vampires in existence. Respect, Marcus said quietly. I can offer her respect, genuine affection, and the freedom to choose her own path. From what I understand, those are things you've never been willing to provide. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Damien's expression grew deadly serious, and several of his entourage moved closer, their hands drifting toward concealed weapons. Careful, mortal, Damien said softly. You speak of things you don't understand to beings who could end your existence with a thought. Enough, Serafina interjected, moving to stand directly between Marcus and Damien. You have no claim here. Damien, I rejected your suit centuries ago, and my decision hasn't changed. Your decision is irrelevant, Damien replied smoothly. Under the laws of continuation, any unmated female of noble vampire bloodline can be claimed by a qualified male. When the survival of the species is at stake, I am more than qualified, and our numbers grow fewer each year. Cordelia stepped forward, her expression stern. The laws of continuation require formal challenge and acceptance by the vampire courts. You cannot simply declare a claim and expect it to be honored. Can't I? Damien smiled, producing an ornate scroll from his coat. I have here a writ of claim, properly filed and approved by the High Court of the Eastern Territories. Serafina Blackthorn is hereby declared subject to formal courtship under ancient law, with all rights and privileges thereof. The document passed from hand to hand among the assembled witnesses, each vampire examining it with growing concern. Marcus couldn't read the archaic script, but the expressions around him told him everything he needed to know. This is legal, one of the witnesses murmured, properly executed and sealed. However, Victor said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension, it only applies to unmated females. If Serafina is already bonded, the claim becomes void. Damien's smile widened, revealing those perfect predatory fangs. Indeed, which is why I arrived precisely when I did. Your little ritual hasn't been completed yet, has it? No blood exchange, no formal binding. She remains unmated and therefore subject to my claim. Marcus felt his heart sink as he realized the trap they'd walked into. Damien had timed his arrival perfectly, interrupting the ceremony before it could be completed. Furthermore, Damien continued, clearly enjoying himself. Any attempt to rush through a mating ritual now would be seen as fraudulent, a desperate attempt to avoid legitimate courtship. The courts would never recognize such a bond. So what do you propose? Serafina asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. A challenge, of course. Damien replied as if it were obvious. Your champion against mine. If your human proves victorious, I'll withdraw my claim permanently. If my champion wins, you accept my courtship as required by law. And if I refuse the challenge entirely, Serafina asked, then the courts will rule in my favor by default, and you'll be compelled to accept my suit regardless. Damien's expression was smugly confident. Either way, my dear Serafina, you will be mine. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about vampire politics anymore. This was about Serafina's entire future, her freedom, her happiness. What kind of challenge? He heard himself asking. Everyone turned to stare at him in surprise. Damien looked particularly amused. The human wishes to be champion. Damien laughed, the sound echoing off the ballroom's high ceiling. How wonderfully entertaining. Very well. Single combat, supervised by neutral witnesses. Fought until surrender or incapacitation. My champion against this. The dismissive way he said this while gesturing at Marcus made anger flare in the librarian's chest. I accept. Marcus, no, Serafina said immediately. You don't understand what you're agreeing to. I understand perfectly, Marcus replied, taking her hands in his. I understand that I love you, and I won't let anyone force you into something you don't want. The mortal has spirit. Damien acknowledged with mock appreciation. However, before we proceed, there's something else you should know about your precious human. Serafina. He gestured to one of his entourage, a vampire with pale blonde hair and calculating eyes. Lucian here has made some interesting discoveries about your Marcus Chen. Marcus felt his blood run cold. What could they possibly have discovered about him? It seems, Damien continued, that our librarian friend is not quite as ordinary as he appears. Tell them what you found, Lucian. The blonde vampire stepped forward. Consulting a leather portfolio, Marcus Chen, born 30 years ago to Dr. Elena Chen and Professor David Chen, both researchers in the field of supernatural anthropology. Orphaned at age 10 when both parents died in what was officially ruled a car accident, but was actually a vampire attack they had been investigating. Territorial disputes between rival covens. Marcus felt the world tilt around him. That's impossible. My parents died in a car crash. I was raised by my grandmother, your grandmother, Margaret Chen, who worked for 40 years as a liaison between human authorities and supernatural communities. Lucian continued relentlessly. She's been protecting you your entire life, hiding your true heritage. What heritage? Marcus whispered. Though part of him was beginning to understand. You're a Dhampir, Damien said with obvious satisfaction. Half human, half vampire. The child of a human mother and a vampire father. Though your parents apparently went to great lengths to hide that fact, the revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Everything suddenly made sense: his resistance to vampire mental influence, his natural comfort around supernatural beings, the way vampires seemed both drawn to and wary of him. That's why you awakened the call in me, Serafina breathed, staring at him with wonder. Dhampirs are incredibly rare, and they're naturally compatible with full vampires. Your blood, your essence, it called to mine, because we're meant to be together. How touching, Damien said dryly. However, this revelation doesn't change the current situation. If anything, it makes the challenge more interesting. A Dhampir versus my champion should provide adequate entertainment. Who is your champion? Victor asked grimly. Damien's smile was predatory. Why, myself, of course. I wouldn't dream of delegating such an important task. The assembled vampires murmured among themselves. A direct challenge from Damien Ravencrest was no small matter. He was legendary for his combat skills and had never been defeated in single combat. This isn't fair, Serafina protested. Marcus has had no training, no preparation. Life rarely is fair, my dear, Damien replied. But those are the terms. Accept or forfeit by default. Marcus looked around the room at the faces of people who had become his family over the past month. Victor looked worried but resigned. Cordelia appeared calculating, as if running odds in her head. The witnesses seemed fascinated by the unfolding drama, but it was Serafina's face that decided him. The fear, the love, the desperate hope warring in her violet eyes. I accept, Marcus said firmly. When and where? Now, Damien replied. The mansion's courtyard will suffice. No weapons save those nature provided us: fangs, claws, strength, and cunning. As the group moved toward the courtyard, Victor caught Marcus's arm. Are you insane? He hissed quietly. Damien is over 600 years old and has never lost a fight. You'll be killed, maybe, Marcus admitted, but I won't let her be forced into anything. Besides, I'm apparently half vampire. That has to count for something, right? Dhampir abilities are unpredictable, Victor warned. Some have vampire strength and speed. Others barely manifest any supernatural traits at all. You won't know what you're capable of until you're tested. Then I guess we're about to find out, Marcus replied. The courtyard had been hastily prepared for the challenge. Torches provided flickering light, and the assembled vampires formed a circle round the designated combat area. Marcus stood at one edge, feeling remarkably calm despite the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. Damien had removed his coat and shirt, revealing a physique that spoke of centuries of combat experience. Scars crisscrossed his pale skin, evidence of battles fought and won over the course of his long existence. Any last words? Damien asked mockingly as they faced each other in the center of the circle. Just one thing, Marcus replied. You keep talking about what's best for vampire survival, about bloodlines and duty, but you're missing the most important factor, which is love. Marcus said simply. Serafina and I love each other. That's not weakness, it's strength. It's the foundation of everything worth preserving about any species. Damien's expression grew cold. Romantic nonsense. Love is a luxury our dying race cannot afford. Then your race deserves to die, Marcus replied, and launched himself forward. What happened next surprised everyone, including Marcus himself. As Damien's clawed hand swept toward his throat, time seemed to slow. Marcus found himself moving with speed he'd never possessed before, ducking under the attack and spinning away with inhuman grace. His Dhampir heritage was awakening. The fight that followed was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. Power flowed through his veins, not the full supernatural strength of a vampire, but something uniquely his own. He was faster than any human had a right to be, stronger than his slender frame suggested, and most importantly, he could anticipate Damien's moves in a way that seemed almost precognitive. But Damien was still a 600-year-old vampire with centuries of combat experience. For every advantage Marcus's newfound abilities provided, Damien countered with skill, experience, and ruthless cunning. The battle raged across the courtyard, both combatants moving almost too fast for mortal eyes to follow. Marcus took hits that should have crippled him but somehow kept fighting, his Dhampir healing factor knitting wounds almost as quickly as they appeared. Impossible. Damien snarled as Marcus dodged another potentially lethal strike. You're just a half-breed. Mongrel. I'm someone who fights for love, Marcus replied, pressing his attack with renewed vigor. That makes all the difference. The turning point came when Damien, frustrated by his inability to land a decisive blow, made a crucial mistake. He overextended himself in a powerful strike meant to end the fight, leaving himself momentarily vulnerable. Marcus didn't hesitate. Drawing on reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed, he caught Damien's wrist and used the vampire's own momentum against him, sending the ancient predator crashing into the courtyard's stone wall with bone-crushing force. Damien slumped to the ground, clearly defeated but still conscious. The courtyard fell silent except for the sound of Marcus's labored breathing. It's over, Marcus said, standing over his fallen opponent. Withdraw your claim. Damien looked up at him with a mixture of rage and grudging respect. You fight well. For a mongrel, he admitted. Very well. I withdraw my claim on Serafina Blackthorn. As witnessed by all present, the formal words released a tension that had been building throughout the evening. Serafina rushed to Marcus's side, her hands immediately checking him for serious injuries. I'm okay, he assured her, though he was swaying slightly on his feet. Better than okay, actually. As Damien and his entourage prepared to leave, the defeated vampire paused at the courtyard's entrance. This isn't over, Dhampir. You've won this battle, but there will be others who challenge your right to her. Let them come, Marcus replied, surprising himself with his confidence. I'll face anyone who tries to hurt her or force her into something she doesn't want. After Damien's departure, the assembled witnesses began to disperse, but not before, each offering their congratulations to the victorious couple. The challenge had been witnessed and recorded. Their right to be together was now unquestionable under vampire law. So, Victor said as the courtyard emptied, shall we finish that bonding ceremony? I'd rather hate for all this drama to go to waste. Part 5, Eternal Devotion. Week after the challenge, Marcus found himself back in the mansion's library, but everything had changed. The Dhampir abilities that had manifested during his fight with Damien had stabilized, leaving him stronger, faster, and more perceptive than any ordinary human. More importantly, the bonding ceremony had been completed the night after the challenge, creating a connection between him and Serafina that went beyond anything he could have imagined. He could feel her emotions as if they were his own, sense her presence anywhere in the mansion, and sometimes, in quiet moments, hear her thoughts whispered across the psychic link they now shared. In return, she experienced the world through his more human perspective. The way colors seemed brighter to him, how he found joy in simple pleasures she'd forgotten after centuries of existence. You're brooding again, Serafina observed, entering the library with that fluid grace he'd grown to love. She wore a simple white dress that made her look ethereal in the morning light, streaming through the tall windows. Not brooding, Marcus corrected, looking up from the book he'd been pretending to read. Contemplating. There's a difference. She settled beside him on the sofa, curling against his side with casual intimacy that still made his heart Race. What profound thoughts are occupying my bonded mate this morning? Marcus set aside his book and pulled her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. I was thinking about how much has changed. A month ago, I was a lonely librarian who talked to his cat and spent weekends organizing his stamp collection. Now I'm bonded to the most incredible woman in existence. I have supernatural abilities, and I'm part of a vampire family. Regrets? Serafina asked, though their bond let her feel his emotions directly. None whatsoever, Marcus replied firmly. Though I do wonder what's next for us. I mean, you've had for centuries to figure out your place in the world. I'm still adjusting to having enhanced senses and a psychic connection to my girlfriend. Bonded mate, Serafina corrected with a smile, and technically, I suppose you could think of me as your wife, if human terminology makes you more comfortable. Wife, Marcus repeated, testing the word. I like that. Mrs. Serafina Chen has a nice ring to it. Serafina laughed, the sound filling the library with warmth. I think I'll keep Blackthorn, thank you very much. For centuries of history is rather difficult to abandon. Fair enough. So, Mrs. Blackthorn, what does our future look like? Before Serafina could answer, Victor burst into the library with his usual dramatic flair. There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you to lovebirds. What is it now, Victor? Serafina sighed, though her tone was affectionate. Letters, Victor announced, brandishing a stack of elegant correspondence. Apparently, word of your bonding and Marcus's victory over Damien has spread throughout the supernatural community. You're suddenly the most popular couple in the underworld. Marcus accepted the letters Victor handed him, examining the ornate seals and expensive paper. What kind of letters? Invitations, mostly, Victor explained. The Werewolf Council wants to meet the Dhampir who defeated Damien Ravencrest. The Phi Court is curious about your human-vampire bond. The London Coven is throwing a celebration in your honor. Oh, and the Vatican wants to discuss matters of mutual interest, which is either very good or very bad. The Vatican, Marcus blinked in surprise. The Church has had complicated relationships with supernatural beings over the centuries, Serafina explained. Some factions are hostile, others are surprisingly progressive. It's impossible to know what you're dealing with until you meet them. Sounds like we're going to be busy, Marcus observed, flipping through the invitations. Are we obligated to respond to all of these? Not obligated, Victor said, but it would be politically wise. You've become symbols, whether you intended to or not. The Dhampir who chose love over politics. The vampire who defied ancient law for personal happiness. Your story is inspiring other supernatural beings to question old traditions. Marcus looked at Serafina, seeing his own mixture of excitement and apprehension reflected in her violet eyes. What do you think? I think, Serafina said slowly, that we have an opportunity to make a real difference. For centuries, supernatural society has been governed by fear, tradition, and the assumption that survival requires sacrificing happiness. We could show them a different way. Supernatural ambassadors, Marcus mused. I like the sound of that. Oh, good, Victor said with evident relief, because I may have already accepted several of the invitations on your behalf. Victor, Serafina protested. What? They were time-sensitive. Besides, I knew you'd say yes. You're both far too noble to hide away in domestic bliss when you could be out there changing the world. Before either of them could respond to Victor's presumption, Cordelia appeared in the doorway. Excuse the interruption, but we have visitors. More suitors? Serafina asked warily. No, family, Cordelia replied with a rare smile. Your grandmother, Marcus, Margaret Chen is here, and she's demanding to meet her grandson's bonded mate. Marcus felt his heart leap. Grandmother's here. How did she find out about recent events? Cordelia finished. The supernatural community is smaller than you might think. Dear boy, news travels fast, especially news this significant. Marcus was on his feet immediately, Serafina rising gracefully beside him. They made their way to the mansion's front hall, where Marcus saw a familiar figure waiting for them. Margaret Chen was a small woman in her 70s, with silver hair and bright eyes that held depths of knowledge and compassion. She looked exactly as Marcus remembered. except for the complete lack of surprise on her face as she took in the opulent vampire mansion. "Hello, Marcus," she said calmly. "You look well, different, but well, grandmother," Marcus said, moving to embrace her. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you about all this. I didn't know how to explain that you'd fallen in love with a vampire and discovered your Dhampir heritage," Margaret interrupted gently. "My dear boy, I've been waiting for this day since you were 10 years old." "You knew?" Marcus stepped back, staring at her in shock. "Of course I knew. I helped hide your true nature for 30 years. Margaret's gaze shifted to Serafina, and she smiled. "And you must be the young lady who's captured my grandson's heart. You're every bit as beautiful as he described in his letters." "I wrote you letters?" Marcus asked, confused. "Our bond means you sometimes share thoughts and experiences without realizing it." Serafina explained softly. "I've been writing to your grandmother on your behalf, telling her about our relationship as it developed." Marcus felt a warm flush of love and gratitude wash over him, even in the midst of all the supernatural drama. Serafina had thought to keep his grandmother informed and involved. "Mrs. Chen," Serafina said formally, "I want you to know that I love your grandson deeply. I'll spend eternity making sure he's happy and protected." Margaret studied Serafina for a long moment, then nodded approvingly. "I can see that you will. And please, call me Gran. We're family now." The simple acceptance in her voice brought tears to Marcus's eyes. "You're not upset about any of this? Upset that you've found love, purpose, and a family that values you?" Margaret shook her head. "Marcus, your parents would be so proud. They always hoped you'd find your place in the supernatural world when you were ready." Over the next several hours, Margaret regaled them with stories about Marcus's parents, their research into supernatural communities, and the network of humans who work to maintain peace between the mortal and immortal worlds. "Your mother was human," Margaret explained as they sat in the conservatory, surrounded by Serafina's night-blooming flowers. "But your father was a vampire who'd chosen to live among humans. They met at a university conference on folklore and fell in love almost immediately." "What happened to them?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "They were investigating a territorial dispute between two vampire covens that was threatening to expose the supernatural world to human authorities," Margaret continued. "Someone didn't want them to succeed in mediating peace. The car accident was staged to look like natural causes. They were murdered," Marcus said quietly. "Yes, but their work wasn't in vain. The evidence they'd gathered eventually led to a peaceful resolution, and their research became the foundation for modern supernatural human relations protocols." Serafina reached over and took Marcus's hand, her cool fingers intertwining with his. Through their bond, he felt her love and support, her determination to honor his parents' memory. "They'd be proud of you both," Margaret said, noting the gesture. "Not just because you've found love, but because you're choosing to use your unique position to help others." "About that," Marcus said, thinking of the stack of invitations waiting in the library. "It looks like we're going to be traveling quite a bit, meeting with various supernatural communities, trying to bridge gaps between different factions. Dangerous work," Margaret observed. "But important work," Serafina added. "The supernatural world is changing, Gran. Old alliances are shifting. New challenges are emerging. Someone needs to help navigate these transitions peacefully." Margaret smiled. "Then you'll need a base of operations, somewhere neutral, welcoming to all supernatural beings, but secure enough to host sensitive negotiations. We have the mansion," Marcus pointed out. "The Blackthorn estate is beautiful, but it's clearly vampire territory." Margaret replied, "What you need is somewhere that belongs to both human and supernatural worlds equally." She reached into her purse and produced a set of keys. "Your parents left you something, Marcus. A property in Salem, Massachusetts. It's been maintained by a trust fund for 30 years, waiting for you to claim it." Marcus stared at the keys, feeling the weight of his parents' legacy. "What kind of property?" "A bookshop," Margaret said with a knowing smile. 3 stories, with living quarters above and a basement that's been specially warded for supernatural gatherings. Your parents intended it to be a meeting place, a neutral ground where humans and supernatural beings could interact safely. A bookshop, Marcus repeated, feeling a sense of rightness settle over him. That's perfect. I thought you might think so, Margaret agreed. Serafina, dear, there are some lovely gardens behind the building, perfect for a vampire who appreciates growing things. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Serafina traveled to Salem to examine their inheritance. The bookshop was everything Margaret had described and more, a beautiful Victorian building, filled with rare books, comfortable reading nooks, and an atmosphere of scholarly peace that reminded Marcus of the university library where they'd first met. The basement had been converted into a conference room, with meeting spaces designed to accommodate beings of various sizes and species. Magical wards protected the building from detection by hostile forces, while enchantments ensured that all who entered with peaceful intent would feel welcome and safe. It's perfect, Serafina said as they stood in the main shop area, surrounded by towering bookshelves and the smell of old paper and binding glue. A place where knowledge is valued above politics, where different beings can come together in peace. Chen and Blackthorn, rare books and supernatural mediation, Marcus mused, envisioning a sign for the front window. Has a nice ring to it. Indeed, it does, Serafina agreed, moving to stand beside him at the large front window that looked out onto Salem's historic streets. Are you sure about this? Though it means leaving the mansion, leaving Victor and Cordelia. It means starting our own chapter, Marcus corrected, pulling her into his arms. Besides, Victor will visit constantly. You know he can't resist being part of the drama. And Cordelia approves of us taking on more responsibility. Their first official case came sooner than expected. A young werewolf pack was being pressured by an old vampire coven to relocate from territory they'd claimed legally. The werewolves couldn't afford the legal fees to fight the challenge, while the vampires were using technicalities in centuries-old treaties to justify their aggression. Marcus and Serafina met with both sides, reviewed the relevant laws, and discovered that the vampire's claim was based on a deliberately mistranslated document. Once the correct translation was provided, along with Marcus's testimony as a dhampir whose word carried special weight in supernatural law, the dispute was resolved peacefully. Word of their success spread quickly through supernatural communities. Soon, they were mediating disputes between Phi courts, helping newly turned vampires adjust to immortality, and even advising human government agencies on supernatural affairs. Their bookshop became a hub of activity, with beings from across the spectrum of supernatural society stopping by for everything from rare book acquisitions to relationship counseling. Marcus found himself using his dhampir heritage and human background to bridge gaps between different species, while Serafina's centuries of experience and noble connections opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. One evening, 6 months after opening their practice, they sat together in their private living space above the shop, sharing a quiet moment away from their increasingly busy professional lives. Any regrets? Serafina asked, echoing their conversation from months earlier. Marcus looked around their cozy apartment, with Ptolemy purring in his lap and the woman he loved curled against his side. Through the windows, he could see the lights of Salem twinkling in the darkness, and he knew that somewhere out there, supernatural beings were living more peacefully because of the work he and Serafina were doing together. Only one, Marcus said finally. Serafina raised an eyebrow in question. I regret that it took me 30 years to visit that library's rare books section. Marcus replied with a grin. If I'd gone there sooner, I might have met you earlier. Serafina laughed. The sound as beautiful now as it had been the first time he'd heard it in the university library. I don't know about that. I think we met exactly when we were supposed to. You needed to be ready for this life, and I needed to be ready for you. Speaking of being ready, Marcus said, suddenly nervous, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. He shifted Ptolemy gently off his lap and knelt beside the sofa, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Serafina's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. I know we're already bonded, Marcus said, opening the box to reveal a ring that seemed to capture and reflect light like a captured star. And I know vampire culture doesn't really include human-style proposals, but I'm still half human, and this feels important to me. The ring was unlike anything Serafina had ever seen, clearly magical in origin, with a stone that seemed to shift between different colors depending on the angle of view. "It's a harmony stone," Marcus explained. "Victor helped me find it. It's supposed to strengthen the bond between matched souls and protect the wearer from supernatural threats." "Marcus," Serafina whispered, tears she couldn't shed gathering in her violet eyes. "Serafina Blackthorn," Marcus continued, "will you marry me? Not because of vampire law or political necessity or species survival, but because I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone, and I want to spend forever making you happy." "Yes," Serafina said without hesitation, extending her hand so he could slide the ring onto her finger. "Yes, of course, yes." The ring fit perfectly, and the moment it settled into place, both of them felt their bond deepen and strengthen. It was as if their souls, already intertwined, had found an even more perfect harmony. "I love you, Mrs. Chen Blackthorn," Marcus said, rising to kiss her properly. "And I love you, Mr. Chen Blackthorn," Serafina replied against his lips. "Forever and always." Their wedding took place in the bookshop's garden on a warm summer evening, officiated by a progressive minister who specialized in supernatural ceremonies. Victor served as Marcus's best man, while Cordelia stood as Serafina's matron of honor. Margaret Chen sat in the front row, beaming with pride, while representatives from dozens of supernatural communities filled the remaining seats. The ceremony blended human and vampire traditions, including the exchange of rings, traditional vows, and a ceremonial sharing of wine that symbolized their eternal bond. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the assembled guests erupted in cheers that could probably be heard throughout Salem. Years passed, and Marcus and Serafina's reputation as mediators and advocates grew throughout the supernatural world. They helped establish the first integrated supernatural community center, mediated the historic peace treaty between the Eastern and Western vampire covens, and even advised the United Nations on drafting the International Supernatural Accords. Marcus never aged beyond his 30s, his Dhampir heritage granting him a lifespan that would match Serafina's immortality. They traveled the world together, collecting rare books, resolving conflicts, and always returning to their beloved bookshop. In Salem, their love story became legend in supernatural circles. The shy librarian who won a vampire's heart with nothing more than politeness and respect, the ancient vampire who chose love over power, and the bond they forged that proved different species could not only coexist, but help each other thrive. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when they sat together in their library, surrounded by books and bathed in candlelight, Marcus would catch Serafina's eye and smile. "Thank you," she would say, as she had countless times before. "For what?" he would reply, though he always knew the answer. "For calling me ma'am that first night, for treating me like a lady instead of a monster, for seeing who I really was beneath the centuries and the fangs and the supernatural politics." "Thank you," he would respond, "for deciding that a simple compliment meant I was worth keeping around." And then they would laugh together, the sound echoing through their bookshop sanctuary, a testament to the truth that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the most ordinary gestures. In the end, Marcus learned that being forced to do his duty by a vampire lady who'd taken a liking to his manners was the best thing that had ever happened to him. And Serafina discovered that sometimes the most powerful magic wasn't found in ancient spells or supernatural abilities, but in the simple human capacity for genuine love and respect. They lived happily ever after in the way that supernatural beings who found their perfect match tend to do, which is to say, forever.